بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى خصوصا على سيد الرسل وخاتم الأنبياء وعلى آله الأزكياء وأصحابه الأتقياء أما بعد. We were studying the different teaching methods of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the first point that the author mentions is how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was such an effective teacher because he led through example, through practice, through action. When a person came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asking a question, it was common for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to show the person the answer rather than just relying on saying the answer. So we covered the narration of Jabir radiallahu anhu in our previous class about a person that came and he spat in the mosque while praying. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saw that, and then he physically showed the companions and made corrections. So today we continue with the same discussion. The second narration, narrated by Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi, Imam Tirmidhi, Imam Nasa'i, and Imam Ibn Majah rahimahullah ta'ala. Inshallah we'll start there today. Go ahead.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. قال المؤلف رحمه الله. Muslim, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, and Ibn Majah rahimahullah narrate from Sulaiman ibn Buraidah, who reports from his father from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A person asked him about the times of salah. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him, "Perform your salah with us for these 2 days, so that you may practically learn the times of salah." When the sun passed its zenith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam ordered Bilal radiallahu anhu to call out the adhan. He then ordered him to say the iqamah for the Dhuhr salah later on. He said the iqamah for the Asr salah when the sun was quite high and clearly white. He then ordered him to say the iqamah for Maghrib salah when the sun had set. He then ordered him to say the iqamah for the Isha salah when the redness on the horizon had disappeared. He then ordered him to say the iqamah for the Fajr salah at the break of dawn. The following day, he performed the Dhuhr salah when it was much cooler. He delayed the Dhuhr salah for much longer than the previous day. He performed the Asr salah when the sun was slightly high and offered it much later than the previous day. He performed the Maghrib salah just before the redness on the horizon could disappear. He performed the Isha salah after 1/3 of the night had passed, and the Fajr salah when it was quite bright.
So on the first day, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam performed all of the prayers in awwal al-waqt, right when time started. The second day, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam also prayed each salah in its time, but more towards the end. So for example, in Fajr salah, second day, وَصَلَّى الْفَجْرَ فَأَسْفَرَ بِهَا. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam delayed the Fajr salah to the point where if a person were to look outside, there was brightness there. Similarly, regarding Maghrib Salah, وَصَلَّى الْمَغْرِبَ قَبْلَ أَنْ يَغِيبَ الشَّفَقِ. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he prayed Maghrib Salah before the time of Isha started, giving this person a physical demonstration of the timings of Salah. That this is the earlier time, this is the later time for you to pray. Yes.
Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said, "Where is the person who had asked about the times of Salah?" The man replied, "Here I am, O Rasulullah." Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "These times of your Salah is between what you saw."
Yes. وَقْتُ صَلَاتِكُمْ مَا بَيْنَ رَأَيْتُمْ. What you saw in praying, this is the middle time for you. You can pray your Salah. The time in between, the duration, you can pray your Salah. Go ahead.
In his commentary of Sahih Muslim, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah said, "This hadith teaches us to explain something practically because greater clarity can be achieved thereby. A practical explanation facilitates understanding for both the questioner and those who are present as well. We also learn that an explanation should be delayed and given at the time when it is needed. This is the method of the majority of scholars." Hadith number 19. Abu Dawood, Nasa'i, and Ibn Majah narrate a hadith from Amr ibn Shu'ayb from his father, from his grandfather, that a man came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, "O Rasulullah, how should I perform my ablution?" Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked for water in a container. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam then washed his palms 3 times, his face 3 times, and his arms 3 times.
Specifically when you're teaching a lesson that has a lot of details to it, like salah time. There are so many points there to mention: beginning time, end time, shafaq this, ghurub this, tulu' this, and zawal this, and mithl awwal, mithl thani. There's so much language there involved that it can become overwhelming. So rather than just sharing the words, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam physically laid it out. Right? Now, when it comes to wudu, again, for a person who's observing for a first time or maybe still is new at this, the whole procedure can be a little overwhelming. That wash your right hand, rinse your mouth 3 times, your nose 3 times, your face 3 times, right arm, left arm, wipe over your whole head, do your ears, and then do your fingers and beard, and then do your feet, and this one and that one. So for these actions, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is teaching them, he teaches them through amal. So you see here, he says, فَدَعَى رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ بِمَاءٍ فِي إِنَاءٍ فَغَسَلَ كَفَّيْهِ ثَلَاثًا ثُمَّ غَسَلَ وَجْهَهُ ثَلَاثًا ثُمَّ غَسَلَ ذِرَاعَيْهِ ثَلَاثًا ثُمَّ مَسَحَ بِرَأْسِهِ وَأَدْخَلَ إِصْبَعَيْهِ السَّبَاحَتَيْنِ فِي أُذُنَيْهِ, inside his ears. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam wiped inside his ears. وَمَسَحَ بِإِبْهَامَيْهِ, he used his thumb عَلَى ظَاهِرِ أُذُنَيْهِ to clean the back part, outer part of his ear. And so you can see now Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is showing it practically through his action, and the one who came to ask doesn't have to remember a lot of content in a list form, but they're able to see the practice of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yes.
He sallallahu alaihi wasallam then washed his feet 3 times each. After this, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "This is how ablution is performed. If anyone does any more or any less than this, he has sinned and done wrong." Or sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "He has done wrong and sinned."
Yeah. If a person does wudu more or less than this isn't necessarily talking about the number of times you wash your limb, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in one narration, Sheikh Manzur Nomani in his Ma'arif al-Hadith, he brings the narrations, and also Sahih Mishkat in the Mishkat al-Masabih, when bringing the narrations regarding washing the limbs, he brings all 3 of them one after the other. In one riwayah, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam washed each limb 1 time. In the second riwayah, immediately after it. Second riwayah, he brings marratin. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam washed each limb 2 times. And then the riwayah right after that, the narration right after it, the author, then Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam washed each limb 3 times. So it's not so much of a number factor here. Rather, it's about istihab. It's about that making sure you wash the limb. If a person does wudu and does not wash these limbs, they have done wrong. In this riwayah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in addition to the fara'id, the obligatory acts, also listed out these sunnah. So therefore, we're learning ظَلَمَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بِتَرْكِ السُّنَّةِ. That person has wronged himself. Why? Because he abandoned the sunnah. That when you do wudu, you should follow the full sunnah procedure. Bear in mind that you're doing wudu to worship Allah, so why would a person cut corners on the way to worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Now, sometimes a person is in a rush, they need to quickly do wudu, they're running late or something like that. Then remember that other riwayah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that you wash it 1 time. Our mashayikh will tell us that when you do wudu at the masjid, because the water being used there is waqf, it's by the donation of the ummah, you should only wash each limb 1 time, he would say, right? So you don't waste water that's basically being purchased or paid for by the ummah as well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us such understanding as well. Go ahead.
Bukhari narrates on the authority of Mu'adh ibn Abdul Rahman, who says that Ibn Aban informed him, saying, "I brought the ablution water to Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu while he was sitting on a seat."
This is one of the most common narrations in the chapter of wudu. That Kayfiyatul wudu, they reference the narration of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu. Almost all the scholars reference this hadith. It's a Bukhari narration, because when Uthman radiallahu anhu was given water for wudu, he did wudu, and then after doing his wudu, he said at the end of it, هَكَذَا رَأَيْتُ النَّبِيَّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ يَتَوَضَّأُ. That the wudu I just did was the wudu that I saw in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he learned it through observation, and when it comes time for him to teach wudu, he also teaches it by performing that wudu, giving his students an opportunity to observe just as he had when he learned with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yes.
He radiallahu anhu performed his ablution in a beautiful manner and said, "I saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam performing his ablution while sitting in this very place." He sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he performed his ablution in a beautiful manner and then said, Whoever performs ablution in this manner comes to the masjid, offers 2 rak'at of salah without occupying himself in any worldly affairs, and then sits down, then all his past sins are forgiven. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam added, do not be deluded.
Yes. Yes.
Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah said that this hadith shows that teaching by example is always more effective for the student. The words of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, do not be deluded, mean that one should not consider the forgiveness of past sins as inclusive of all sins, because one will then become lax in abstaining from sins and begin relying on their forgiveness through salah.
The ulama agree that when the ahadith mention that by doing a particular good deed, your sins are forgiven, these sins are referring to the saghair, not the kabair. Minor sins, not the major. Major sins are forgiven through tawbah. And the truth is that there's nothing easier to do than tawbah. You don't have to even do anything. You don't need to go somewhere. You don't need to say a particular statement. It's a kayfiyah, it's a state that a person enters into absolute remorse, and they have, a sense of apology. That in that moment their tawbah is presented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes.
The reason why one should not become lax is that the salah, which is an expiation of sins, is one which is accepted by Allah ta'ala. And one does not know whether his salah is accepted or not.
So the first thing is, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is saying that إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ الَّتِي تُكَفِّرُ الذُّنُوبَ هِيَ الْمَقْبُولَةُ. This is Ibn Hajar's statement. That the salah that actually expiates sins is the accepted salah. Now, who here can say confidently that my salah was accepted? Point number 1. إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ الَّتِي تُكَفِّرُ الذُّنُوبَ هِيَ الْمَقْبُولَةُ وَلَا اطِّلَاعَ لِأَحَدٍ عَلَيْهَا. Nobody knows if their salah is even accepted or not. Inshallah it is. We should have high hopes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we can't speak confidently. And then ثم المكفر بالصلاة هي الصغائر فقط. ثم المكفر. Then after that, the second point you need to keep in mind is the sins that are expiated, the sins that are forgiven, they are the minor sins. دون الكبائر وحقوق العباد. We are not speaking of major sins, and neither are we talking about violations against other human beings. That still is outstanding. Yes, go ahead.
It should also be borne in mind that the sins which are forgiven through salah are only the minor ones. Forgiveness does not include major sins or those that are associated with the rights of fellow human beings. On one occasion, Rasulullah ﷺ led the people in salah while he was on the pulpit so that all of them could see and learn by observing his actions. Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Sahl ibn Sa'd.
On the pulpit, on the minbar, a little higher. So not everyone that's sitting on the ground level can look upwards and see how Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is performing his salah. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam did the whole salah there. Naturally, if you're standing on the minbar, how are you going to do sajda? Right? So the riwayah at the end says, ثُمَّ رَجَعَ الْقَهْقَرَ لِيَسْجُدَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ. So Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he حَتَّى سَجَدَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he prayed salah on the minbar while standing, bowed down and everything. But when it came time for sajda, رَجَعَ الْقَهْقَرَ, he moved back a little bit. Stepped off of the minbar, did sajda on the ground. And then the rest of it they saw on the minbar, showing people how to pray salah. Very effective for salah as well. Like in wudu, we were saying, teaching through actions. Salah as well, observation. That you learn by seeing other people pray salah. Yes.
Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Sahl ibn Sa'd al-Sa'idi radiallahu anhu, who said, I saw Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam standing on the pulpit. He faced the Qibla and said, Allahu Akbar. The people stood behind him. He sallallahu alayhi wa sallam then recited a portion of the Quran and went into ruku'. The people behind him also went into ruku'. He sallallahu alayhi wa sallam raised his head and walked back a little without turning around. He sallallahu alayhi wa sallam then prostrated onto the ground. Thereafter, he returned to the pulpit, recited a portion of the Quran, and went into ruku'. He sallallahu alayhi wa sallam raised his head and walked back a little, and then prostrated onto the ground. When he completed his salah, he turned to the people and said, O people, I did this so that you may follow me and you may learn my method of offering salah.
Yeah. أيها الناس إنما صنعت هذا لتأتموا بي ولتعلموا صلاتي. The reason why I prayed on the minbar instead of praying where he would normally pray in the mihrab, where Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam led from. The reason why I prayed here was so that everyone can see me, لتعلموا صلاتي, so you can learn. Go ahead.
In his commentary of Sahih Muslim, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah said, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained to them that his ascending the pulpit and offering salah on it was solely to enable them to observe and learn all his movements. If he had stood on the ground, only those who were close to him would have seen him. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah writes, we learn from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's words, O people, I did this so that you may follow me and you may learn my method of offering salah. That the wisdom of offering his salah at the top of the pulpit was that those who would not have been able to see him offering his salah on the ground could see him. We learn from this incident that if a person does something unusual, example offering salah on the pulpit, as in this incident, he should explain his action to his associates and followers.
People are going to assume what you're doing is permissible, specifically if you're a leader. That, the imam is doing this because that's what the Sharia says. But if you're going to do something out of line, as a community leader, as a teacher specifically, as a qudwa, then you should clarify that in this moment what I did is not the norm, but I did it this way because of X, Y, and Z. Explain yourself. You shouldn't always assume that everyone knows what's going on in your heart and in your mind. If you do something wrong publicly, you should clarify. Either admit that it was wrong or tell people that this is not the Sharia, rather the Sharia ruling is this, the legal ruling is this, but this particular act of mine was in this context. So Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah ta'ala says, وَيُسْتَفَادُ مِنْهُ أَنَّ مَنْ فَعَلَ شَيْئًا يُخَالِفُ الْعَادَةِ يَنْبَغِي أَنْ يُبَيِّنَ حِكْمَتَهُ لِأَصْحَابِهِ. You clarify and tell people why you did what you did. وَفِيهِ جَوَازُ تَعْلِيمِ الْمَأْمُومِينَ أَفْعَالَ الصَّلَاةِ بِالْفِعْلِ وَجَوَازُ الْعَمَلِ الْيَسِيرِ فِي الصَّلَاةِ. Similarly, we learn from this that in salah it is permissible to have minor movements. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had to take a step back to do sajda on the earth. Sometimes you're in prayer, you have to move a little to the left, a little to the right. Maybe you have to itch yourself. Minor movements, soft movements, nothing too aggressive. These things are all jaiz in salah. Yes?
The following lessons are derived from this incident. It is permissible to practically teach the congregation the different postures of salah. Slight or minor movements are permissible in salah, and major movements in salah are also permissible if done separately. Example, walking backwards. It is preferable for a person to use the pulpit to demonstrate any movement because it is easier for others to perceive his actions and to hear his words. Abu Dawud and Ibn Majah narrate on the authority of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam passed a boy who was skinning a sheep.
In this riwayah, Imam Ibn Majah rahmatullahi alayhi narrates it in his Kitab al-Dhabaih, the chapter on sacrifice and slaughtering, under the subchapter of skinning an animal. On the other hand, Imam Abu Dawud rahmatullahi alayhi narrates it in the chapter of wudu, whether your wudu is affected or not if a person touches some meat. By physically making contact with meat, is your wudu affected or not? So this narration from Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu, he says that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed by a young man who was skinning an animal. فَقَالَ لَهُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ تَنَحَّى حَتَّى أُرِيَكَ. That why don't you step aside? Let me show you how it's done. Let me show you how to skin an animal. فَأَدْخَلَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ يَدَهُ بَيْنَ الْجِلْدِ وَاللَّحْمِ. Nabi took his hand and put it between the skin and the meat. You know, they do that to create space, to create separation. فَدَحَسَ بِهَا حَتَّى تَوَارَتْ إِلَى الْإِبْتِ. Dahasa means he put his hand in all the way until Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's arm disappeared right until the armpit, all the way inside, creating space and separating the skin from the meat. Yes.
He then said, "Oh boy, this is how you should skin an animal." Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then continued on his way and led the people in salah without performing ablution.
Yes. So that's the hukum. The masala there is, after that was done, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then went and وَصَلَّى لِلنَّاسِ وَلَمْ يَتَوَضَّأ. He went and led the people in prayer and did not do wudu. So the hukum is on one side, the ruling is on one side, but the reason why the author rahimahullah ta'ala mentions this incident is because Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught this young man this practice through his action. That this is the way you do it. Go ahead.
Teaching aspects of the Sharia in stages. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used the gradual.
Under this narration, I won't go into it because we are limited in time and we have so much to cover. Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda rahimahullah ta'ala actually shares a beautiful poem. It's an Arabic poem. Because the riwayah mentioned the word فَدَحَسَ بِهَا دحس بها. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam أدخل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يده بين الجلد واللحم فدحس بها. I told you guys a few moments ago, what does the word dahasa mean? To push your arm in between flesh. You call that dahasa biha. الدحس أن يدخل الرجل يده بين جلد الشاة وصفاقتها ليسلخها. To skin it, put your hand inside. So then after mentioning the word dahasa, he then says, the author rahimahullah ta'ala says, وجاء لفظ دحس في شعر عال رفيع ومعنى نبيل بديع أحببت ذكره هنا. That because the word dahasa was mentioned, there's a poem that I read that's very beautiful in meaning, so I wanted to share it. I'll read it for you guys. For those of you who are more interested, you can read the commentary on it. He has a few footnotes on the poem. It's beautiful. He says, وَحَيِّ ذَوِي الْأَبْغَانِ تَسْبِي قُلُوبَهُمْ وَحَيِّ ذَوِي الْأَبْغَانِ أَبْغَانِ. Abghan means people who have animosity and hatred in their heart. Daghan. وَحَيِّ, socialize, live with. ذَوِي الْأَبْغَانِ تَسْبِي قُلُوبَهُمْ تحية ذي الحسنى فقد يرفع النقل. Naqal is in our language we say bosida juta, a worn out slipper or shoe. A shoe that's all worn out and it's gone very weak and its stitching is coming off and the leather is all torn up. This is naqal. Al-khuf al-khalaq. Al-khuf, footwear. Khalaq is something that's again worn out. So he says, فَقَدْ يُرْفَعُ النَّقَلِ. When you have a worn out shoe, you can just leave it there, or you can take it to a cobbler, and the cobbler can work on it and mend it and fix the leather and polish it down. So similarly, these people who have hatred in their heart and they're rough people, you can either abandon them like a worn shoe, you can just leave it there and it'll get thrown away and that's gone, no value in there, or you can go to work on it. Or you can go to work on it. You can try to give it some attention. So he says, تَحِيَّةَ ذِي الْحُسْنَى فَقَدْ يُرْفَعُ النَّقَلِ فَإِنْ دَحَسُوا بِالشَّرِّ فَاعْفُ تَكَرُّمًا وَإِنْ كَتَمُوا عَنْكَ الْحَدِيثَ فَلَا تَسَلْ فَإِنَّ الَّذِي يُؤْذِيكَ مِنْهُ سِمَاعُهُ وَإِنَّ الَّذِي قَالُوا وَرَاءَكَ لَمْ يُقَلْ. Okay, go ahead, continue.
Teaching aspects of Sharia in stages.
So the first thing was Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam teaching through his own practical actions. Point number 2, the second important teaching methodology of Rasulullah تعليمه الشرائع بالتدريج. That Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would teach incrementally, piece by piece, not giving it all at once. You have to piecemeal it. Someone comes to you and they say, I want to learn algebra, buddy, before we go to algebra, how about we study a few basic things? Let's start with some point 1, point 2, point 3, before we go into something more sophisticated. Not that algebra is sophisticated, but you guys understand. Like for a third grader, algebra would be sophisticated. There's a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid who heard something about math, and maybe someone referenced algebra, he comes to class and says, I want to learn algebra. So the sheikh will most likely say, slow down. Why don't you slow down a little bit? Let's get some basics, let's get addition out of the way, let's get basic fractions out of the way before we go ahead. So bit-tadrij, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would teach things incrementally. The student wants it all at once. The nature of all students. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, مَنْهُومَانِ لَا يَشْبَعَانِ مَنْهُومٌ فِي الْعِلْمِ لَا يَشْبَعُهُمْ. That the hunger of a student can't be satisfied. They want it. And to be honest, it's not something blameworthy, is it? Their greed is for something good, so they want to learn it all at once. But the teacher's responsibility is to not teach it all at once. That, Berta, look, we can have this level of the conversation today, but there's a second part of this conversation that we can't have today. I just need you to trust me. We'll talk about this later, inshallah. So everything in its own place and time. Tadarruj. Go ahead.
Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used a gradual approach in teaching. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam would present the most important aspects first, and then the less important.
So in our Muslim community, people like knowing about the latest hot debate that's going on ulum al-hadith. Two shuyukh writing rebuttals on another. Kisi ko wudu ka koi ठिकाना नहीं है. No one knows how to do wudu, no one knows how to do istinja, khane ka ठिकाना नहीं है, adab ka ठिकाना नहीं है. They don't know basic things, and they want to learn about what? Like, tell me what's What's the latest on whether Sahih al-Bukhari is authentic or not? Jahil people. This is khilafat tadarruj. And this is why you need mentors in life. That when you ask them a question like, Sheikh, can you explain the sanad of Sahih Muslim, and you haven't read Qada al-Nuraniya, they'll slap you on your head. That why don't you take a little break, go do some abada, and then come back later on, and we'll talk about what's next. Tadarruj, tadrij, everything. فَكَانَ يُقَدِّمُ الْأَهَمَّ فَالْأَهَمَّ. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would teach what's important. And then after that, what's important. I asked one of my teachers, Mufti Shabir Saab, may Allah prolong his life, once. We were sitting in class. I said, Hazrat, aapki kya rai hai Ibn al-Arabi ke bare mein? Scholar, but there's some controversy around. So I said, what's your opinion regarding Ibn al-Arabi? So he said, Mutara sahi nahi karta hai, Ibn al-Arabi ke bare mein puchta hai. You don't do your mutala properly, you don't study properly. I remember that day in my life. I really remember that day. He said, you don't do your mutala properly, you don't study your work properly, your preparation is half done, and you're talking about Ibn Arabi. He said, focus on this right now. Similarly, one person came to Maulana Thanvi rahmatullahi alayhi, and he asked him, who was right, Ali radiallahu anh or Muawiyah radiallahu anh? Who was correct? There was a dispute between the two companions. Who was more correct, Ali radiallahu anh or Muawiyah radiallahu anh? Thanvi rahimahullah ta'ala said to him that if Allah asks you this question on the Day of Judgment, you blame me. Just point your finger at me that this guy, he held ilm back from me. In the meantime, go focus on other things in life. Go buy your wife a present. He didn't say those exact words, but you guys understand. Go do something with your life instead of engaging in these fruitless discussions. Now, there is a place and time for these conversations, by the way. For ulama, tulab al-ilm, majalis al-ilm, there are specialists there. These discussions can and should occur. But yes, go ahead.
He sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to teach a little at a time, so that whatever he taught could easily be absorbed and more effectively memorized and understood. Ibn Majah narrates on the authority of Jundab ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhu, who said, we were with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a group of youth close to the age of maturity.
نحن فتيان حزاورة. حزاورة means قريب البلوغ. So they were close to maturity. حزاورة. Go ahead.
We learned what Iman was before we could learn the Quran.
So the first thing Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught them was what? Iman. They get to know your Allah first. Just like in Makki revelation, pre-Hijrah revelation, you read those ayat, most of them are about what? Iman. Develop the Iman of the reader. Yes.
In this way, we increased our Iman.
So, تعلمنا الإيمان قبل أن نتعلم القرآن ثم تعلمنا القرآن فازددنا به إيمان. He taught us Iman first, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then taught us Quran. So now that we were learning the Quran, it impacted the Iman. It made our Iman even stronger. La ilaha illallah, the hikmah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yes. If you don't teach your children the importance of gratitude to Allah or loving Allah and jump straight ahead and teach them Salah, it'll be a burden on them. So first you build their Iman, a meaningful relationship with Allah. And now teach them Salah, that Salah will increase the first thing. One thing at a time. Al-ahammu fal-ahammu. Yes.
Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, who said, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam sent Mu'adh radiallahu anhu to Yemen. When dispatching him, he advised him, you will meet some people of the book. You should invite them towards being a bearing testimony that there is none worthy of
the first thing, فَدْعُوهُمْ إِلَى شَهَادَةِ أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. When you go to Yemen and you invite people to Islam, teach them the Shahada first. فَإِنْهُمْ أَطَاعُوا لِذَلِكَ فَأَعْلِمْهُمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ افْتَرَضَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَدَقَةً. And after that's done, then you teach them the other things. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, teach them the lesson of zakat first. تُخَذُ مِنْ أَغْنِيَائِهِمْ فَتُرَدُّ عَلَى فُقَرَائِهِمْ فَإِنْهُمْ أَطَاعُوا لِذَلِكَ فَإِيَّاكَ وَكَرَائِمَ أَمْوَالِهِمْ. So when they do give you their sadaqah and zakat, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is saying, don't take the best of their wealth. Take what's moderate. If they had to give 3 horses and you take the best one, the most expensive one, they're not going to like you and they're going to avoid giving zakat in the future. فَإِيَّاكَ وَكَرَائِمَ أَمْوَالِهِمْ. Don't take the best of their wealth. وَاتَّقِ دَعْوَةَ الْمَظْلُومِ فَإِنَّهُ لَيْسَ بَيْنَهَا وَبَيْنَ اللَّهِ حِجَابٌ. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, be mindful of the prayer of the one that is oppressed, for there is no barrier between his prayer and Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Next narration.
Imam Ahmad rahimahullah narrates on the authority of Muhammad ibn Fudayl from Ata on the authority of Abu Abdul Rahman, who said, one of the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam who used to teach us narrated to us that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to teach them 10 verses. They would not learn the next 10 verses until they had learned the first 10 and what they could practice upon.
So 10 verses at a time. And not just memorizing 10 verses, حَتَّى يَعْلَمُوا مَا فِي هَذِهِ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ وَالْعَمَلِ. That what is the knowledge that needs to go, that is paired with these 10 verses? What are these 10 verses saying? What is the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying to you in these verses? And wal-amal. That what actions can you derive from these verses? Which means the hifd process is surely prolonged, but it becomes meaningful. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. Yes.
Tabari narrates on the authority of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, who said, when any of us learned 10 verses, he would not proceed until he had learned their meaning and how to put them into practice. Exercising moderation and preventing boredom. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to take into consideration the times and circumstances of his Sahaba when advising and teaching them, so that they would not get bored. In doing this, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam would...
They would not get bored. That's the important thing here. So, pacing yourself. On one side, tadreej, you're spreading out the knowledge so that they can digest the information. But the second thing here is that don't overdo it as well, because you may bore them. They'll get exhausted, they'll get tired. You can take the most beautiful dish in the world. If someone has like biryani, maqluba, or pizza, whatever it is that you like a lot, you have it every day, or if you have it too frequently, what happens? You don't enjoy it anymore, no matter how delicious it is. It's not that the food lost its flavor, it's that you were overexposed. So the same thing with the ilm, that you have to be mindful. وَكَانَ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ يَتَعَاهَدُ أَوْقَاتَ أَصْحَابِهِ وَأَحْوَالَهُم فِي تَذْكِيرِهِمْ وَتَعْلِيمِهِمْ لِئَلَّا يَمَلُّوا. Right? وَكَانَ يُرَاعِي فِي ذَلِكَ الْقَصْدَ وَالْاعْتِدَالَ. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam maintained moderacy when educating his companions. Now he narrates the riwayat. The first riwayat is from Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala in his Kitab al-Ilm. باب ما كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يتخولهم بالموعظة والعلم كي لا ينفروا. Right? So Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi establishes the chapter. The chapter is that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would sometimes space out his teaching. يتخولهم بالموعظة, give them breaks from teaching, from giving advice. والعلم كي لا ينفروا, so they wouldn't be exhausted, so they wouldn't detest the knowledge they were learning. So under that chapter he narrates, and Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi also narrates a similar riwayah in his Sahih. Under the chapter, باب الاقتصاد في الموعظة, the chapter on being moderate when advising, not overdoing it, not underdoing it. So this narration is narrated by both Bukhari and Muslim, and they have their own chapter headings. What's the narration? From Shaqiq Abu Wa'il. He says, we were sitting with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu outside of his home waiting for him. فَمَرَّ بِنَا يَزِيدُ بْنُ مُعَاوِيَةَ النَّخَعِي. So Yazid bin Muawiyah came out of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu's house and he was passing by. فَقُلْنَا أَعْلِمْهُ بِمَكَانِنَا. We said, go tell Ibn Mas'ud that we're sitting by his doorstep so he can come and teach us. A group of them were waiting. فَدَخَلَ عَلَيْهِ فَلَمْ يَلْبَثْ أَنْ خَرَجَ عَلَيْنَا عَبْدُ اللَّهِ. Shortly after, Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu came out of the home. فقال إني أخبر بمكانكم فما يمنعني أن أخرج إليكم إلا كراهية أن أملكم. I was told that you were sitting outside. You must know that the only reason I didn't come out to teach you is because I'm worried that you will get exhausted. You'll get tired, not too frequently. إن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يتخولنا بالموعظة في الأيام مخافة السامة علينا. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam did the same with us. That he would allow us to space it out. Anything, you overdo it, you get exhausted. The Arabic poet talks about friendship. He says to his friend, سَأَطْلُبُ عَنْكُمْ بُعْدَ الدَّارِ لِتَقْرُبَنِي. I want you to move far away from me so we can fall in love even deeper, so we can get closer to one another. Right? The same goes with relationships. It's good to be close to relatives, but not too close. It's good to have a little gap, a little space, so you can infrequently visit, maintaining adab, maintaining etiquette, always being considerate of one another. When you're with people all the time, no matter how dear and loving they are, they will cross the boundaries of adab. It's just the nature of life, right? Unless they're really good human beings. And in that case, the relationship sours. So that's that riwayah. The second narration, He narrates from Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi. He says Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi narrates it in his Kitab al-Ilm under the chapter of Man ja'ala li ahli al-ilmi ayyaman ma'luma, that you dedicate days for education. That's the chapter heading that Imam Bukhari has. And he also narrates from Imam Muslim. It's a similar narration of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, but the wording is a little different. كان عبد الله يذكر الناس في كل خميس, that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu would give these public advices and lectures to the companions every Thursday. فقال له رجل يا أبا عبد الرحمن هذه كنية عبد الله بن مسعود إنا نحب حديثك ونشتهيه لوددنا أنك حدثنا كل يوم. So one person said, instead of lecturing us every Thursday, how about you start giving your dars every day? لوددنا أنك حدثنا كل يوم. We would like to study from you every day. فقال ما يمنعني أن أحدثكم إلا كراهية أن أمل لكم. And the rest of the riwayah is the same. But the reason why I don't do this is because it will exhaust you. So when teaching as well, you have to see the appetite of the student. Some students are such that some subjects, and it's different because some subjects are such that you need to teach them every day for them to settle in. You can't skip around with them, right? The more frequently you teach them, it solidifies in the mind. But then there are some people and some subjects that are such that you have to space them out. It goes back to the teacher paying close attention to the student and knowing at what point they're benefiting and when that has stopped. The next narration, we'll do two more and then we'll close off. The next narration is also narrated by Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi. Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi narrates it in his Kitab al-Ilm, and Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi narrates it in his Kitab al-Jihad. عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال يسروا ولا تعسروا بشروا ولا تنفروا. يسروا ولا تعسروا. But make ease for people. Don't make it difficult on people. Instead of giving, like some people, they can sit down to give dars and they give 4-hour long lectures, 3-hour long lectures. I've seen this in the masjid. 1 hour, 2-hour long lectures. It's unnecessary in most cases. You should be able to complete your subject matter within half an hour, 30, 40 minutes, that's it. After 1 hour, what's happening? The speaker is sleeping, the audience is sleeping. No one's paying attention anymore. So, yassiru, take it easy. وَلَا تُعَسِّرُوا, don't make things hard. بَشِّرُوا, give people glad tidings. وَلَا تُنَفِّرُوا, do not cause hatred, and don't turn them against one another. And the last narration for today is also from Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi, narrated by Abu Musa al-Ashari radiallahu anhu. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا بعث أحدا من أصحابه في بعض أمره قال بشروا ولا تنفروا يسروا ولا تعسروا. That when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would send a Sahabi as a representative somewhere, as a delegation somewhere, he would say to them, make things easy on people, don't make it hard. Right? Every time you make something hard, people will turn away. So from this particular point, this teaching method of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what we're learning is pace yourself. Keep an eye on the student. You might be excited as a teacher when students from who have studied with us in the past, Sheikh, I'm going back to my community and I'm going to start giving a weekly dars. The people in the community have asked me, so I'm going to start teaching Sharh al-Aqaid. For those of you who didn't get it, it's advanced book. You tell the buddy, hey, take a break on Sharh al-Aqaid, and why don't we start with Seerah, Tafsir of the last few surahs, maybe the Qira'ah class, basic Tazkiyah class. Start easy. The students, because they're half nerds, they're like, you know what, I'm going to do dars every day for 3 hours. Baba, nobody's going to come. They won't benefit from you. How about you do 20 minutes a week? That might be more effective. So slow down on your greed and your eagerness and think of how this is going to impact the students. This is the teaching of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You're not teaching yourself, you're teaching the students. So when you're teaching them, you need to have them in mind. How are they going to benefit the most? This next part of the next chapter is very beautiful. Inshallah, we'll cover in our next class. رعايته الفروق الفردية في المتعلمين. How Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave attention to individual students. How he took the individual into consideration when teaching, when answering questions. It's a very beautiful chapter. If Allah wills and gives us life, we will cover this in our next class. وصلى الله تعالى على سيدنا محمد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.